Margaret. I'll be your broadcast engineer today. Welcome back to fmtraining.tv. I'm here with the wonderful HOnza Koudelka and Wim Decorte, both of which are really awesome people, and I think we've never had them on the same show before, so it's a lot of awesomeness contained in one Zoom call. Today we have a really fantastic topic. Basically, Wim and HOnza are going to be talking about stress testing FileMaker Server, going over performance, both of which they are masters at. So this will be a really fun conversation. And then this will be kind of I've discussed this before, but this Thursday it'll kind of be HOnza's slot for a while. HOnza is going to be taking people all across the FileMaker community and bringing them in to talk about really interesting topics. He will be acting as Richard usually does, just asking questions, interacting, hosting the conversation, and I will be what I do usually do, which is I grab your questions and I fling them at them. So, in that respect, same dynamic, different people. So this will be happening. I think me and HOnza just added another day, so this will probably be happening through all of November, which will be very fun. I look forward to having him on. Having HOnza on is always great. All the people he's bringing on are fantastic. Speaking of which, I think it's time to hand it over to you, HOnza and Wim. What are we doing today? What's happening?
Okay, thanks, Margaret. Many people may know me for talking about performance and sharing my performance test results, which I'm doing, I guess, since 2008. But I'm not the only one testing and analyzing performance of FileMaker platform. And Wim, who is my first guest here, is one of those well-known people doing a lot of performance testing. And he even created a tool that he called Punisher or FM Punisher. Well, I guess many of us wanted to punish FileMaker for being slow at some time. So I think that name is very well chosen. And I thought it was around for many years, and I just stumbled upon an article introducing it just 4 years ago. Is it possible that it's so young, Wim?
That sounds about right, yeah.
Well, I thought it was around like for a decade already.
No, it just feels that way. But just like your tool, we've always wanted the tool specifically to test FileMaker Server, right? And to try and isolate all the variables that otherwise get in the way when we do testing. So to put it in context, this isn't a tool to test any specific solution. Like if you want to know if your solution or how your solution behaves on different types of hardware or different versions of FileMaker Server, this is not the tool, right? That would be more like OmniBlaze that you'll cover with our Carl in a later session. This one was built specifically to answer some of the questions that I'm sure you've had in a long time too. Like, is FileMaker multi-threaded? Can FileMaker take advantage of more memory, more cores? What is the effect if you put in faster hard drives in a server, right? And so with the advent of virtual servers or easy to build virtual servers, because we use AWS for this, and I can spin up a server inside a couple of minutes because it's all API calls anyway. So we wanted a tool, and we built a tool to help answer that specific question. Like if we run the same thing on this server and we run the same thing on that server, like there's no variability in what exactly that we're running, then we have some good numbers that will tell us on this hardware it takes so long, on that hardware it takes that long, which is what we wanted. Because not only just different types of hardware, which is a really important question, right? Like how does my Mac Mini stack up against an AWS server? That kind of thing, right? Like and you and I talked about this before the session. If you don't have numbers, it's just an opinion, right? It's just guessing at whether it's good or bad. And people will make up a story, right? Like if you don't, but what we want is the numbers, like show me the numbers, right? And invariably, that's the interesting thing, that invariably you'll be surprised, right? The thing that you thought was happening isn't happening, and that's what we want to see in the numbers, right? The other big reason for building this for us was in ETS, right? In FileMaker's beta testing, we wanted to know on the same hardware, like if we don't switch between hardware, but on the same level of hardware, how does FileMaker 21 stack up against FileMaker 20 or 19 or 18, right? Because we see this anecdotal evidence of, I think that this version is slower or faster, right? It's so now we can put some numbers to that.
That's always happening. Just for people who are not aware of what ETS is, let's say that it's an abbreviation. I think it stands for external testing. Do you know what this S stands for?
Sites.
Site.
Yeah.
Okay,
Which is an odd way to name
yeah.
that.
So basically, that's that's an acronym that Claris has for a long time used for all the people outside of Claris getting access to a pre-release versions of FileMaker to test it out and report any issues that they find. Well, Wim, so do I understand it correctly that the best use of Punisher is just run a test on a specific configuration, then change ideally just one configuration option and run the test again to see the impact of that change?
Absolutely. That is probably the best way to test, right? Because then you will see whether your understanding of what kind of hardware changes have an impact. The nice thing, and I'll show you in a sec, the nice thing is that Punisher is broken down into different scripts because different types of activity within FileMaker use different resources. An obvious one is import and export. You would imagine that it taxes the hard drive more than running a loop that sets a variable, right? Which would be more on the processing memory, perhaps, right? So we try to build, and Punisher is wide open, so you can build your own scripts if you don't like mine. We try to come up with a cross-section of scripts that test every single aspect of a deployment, right? And I mentioned, actually, let me share my screen here real quick. And
so you mentioned it's focused on server testing. So if I recall correctly, it's primarily using server-side scripts to run the test, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I talked in the beginning we wanted to have a test that isolates and focuses on the server, right? So you can imagine that if I run scripts that I run as part of the client does a lot of the work, right? So that's not really a good test to see how long it takes. There is some server activity involved clearly because data needs to flow and the server will try to take on certain types of work. But we wanted to take away all the variables that are not server. I wanted to take away networking, right? So it does everything to perform script on server. I'll show you in a sec what the script. So there's about a dozen scripts or so. And then in the tool, you set how many sessions, concurrent sessions on the server you want, like one PSOS session or 5 or 20, whatever you want. And when you do that, they all start and stop the same script at the same time so that you really test the same thing and stress test the same thing. Like if you want to stress test an export, then that's exactly what's going to happen. All your sessions that you set up are going to run at the same time on the server. So it's all PSOS. The doesn't matter what client you use, what client machine that you use. It's really just all about the server.
So I guess the time when you came up with the tool is probably closely aligned to when Claris actually released the perform script on server, right?
Yes, that was the thing that allowed us to do this, right? So we had worked with other sets of tools that did try to do the same thing, but they always involved more than just the server, right? So for the first time, we could really just focus on the server and do that kind of testing.
Do you think it's a good time to show Punisher in action, or
Absolutely.
do you want to cover some additional theory before showing it?
I'm sure that we'll come back to some of the theory. Like I said, the three use cases really did that for Punisher. One is to test the same thing on different kinds of hardware to see if I throw more cores or more memory or faster drives at something, like how does the needle move. The other one is test different versions of FileMaker Server. So you use the same server, but you use different versions of FileMaker Server to see how FileMaker Server impacts the performance. The third one is a little more specialized, and I'll talk about that at the next Engage in Austin. Is you can use this to build footprints. Like the topcall stats log is one of my favorite logs, right? Because it shows the operations that happen at the FileMaker server and how long they take. So everything that we do as developers that we ask FileMaker server to do, FileMaker server will break down in what they call calls or operations. There isn't really good documentation. You and I talked about this before, and we're trying to push Claris in providing a little better documentation around these things. But when you get faced with helping a client figure out why a solution is slow, you will use the topcall stats log. So you need to be able to interpret what that is, and a tool like Punisher can help. For instance, you can have a script that just loops and creates a bunch of records.
I'm glad you talk about the top call stats. So what do you think? And I guess I know what you answer. What do you think about that? When they released top call stats, it was off by default whenever you restart FileMaker server, and that the default interval is set, I guess, to 30 seconds, and they are warning everyone against making it shorter. So what do you think about it?
I've always, I have strong opinions about that, right? I'm going to say it's borderline criminal that it's off. Because why would you want a server that doesn't tell you what's happening? It makes no sense to me, right? So I'm glad that it's actually on by default in the recent version of FileMaker server. So finally, they got rid of that warning that scares people into not using it. We come across this every day. I'm sure you do too, right? When I ask a client, I can't help you because I don't know what's going on. Like I don't have the logs. And they say, yeah, but we don't want to turn on the logs because there's this warning. I said, forget about it. Like, don't worry about it. So it's unfortunate that we have to, I guess, contradict what Claris is saying. So finally, they got past that and it's now on by default. Shortening the interval, anything that logs, it will have to write to a log file. It has to involve some processing, some disk activity. So the act of monitoring has an impact on the server that you're monitoring. That's just a fact. And that's not specific to FileMaker server. That's the same if you use Zabbix or Datadog on a SQL server. Doesn't matter. It's always the same thing. Monitoring requires a little bit of resources. But if that's the thing that makes your server fall over, you have a bigger problem, right? So there really should be never a reason to turn off logging. That's my opinion.
What I typically say is, well, consider not the amount of data that's being logged, but how that is proportional to all the other stuff that the server is supposed to do. And if the top call stats log occupies 1/10 of a percent of what the server's job is, then you don't have to worry about it, right?
Agreed. It's really only, I've never seen it be an issue, even on underpowered servers where you potentially may expect it to be a problem. So I've never ever see it be a problem.
And there is that cap that it only logs up to 25 lines per interval, not more, right?
I wish we could configure that, right? Because that's one of the downsides of the top call stats log. On a very busy server, by default, it gives you very partial data, right? So you're missing a bunch of stuff, but yeah.
It would be great to be configurable, but at least it's the answer to all those people worried about it. Because it's a hard cap and it will never, the top call stats will never make the server busier than writing 25 lines per interval.
Yep, exactly. That's a really good way to put it.
So let's take a look at Punisher a little bit. The first time I saw it, it looked like a lot of stuff. It was very difficult to get oriented in it, but I guess you have some way how to make it easy.
Yep, it does a fair bit, right? So try to break it. Let's start with the scripts, right? So and like I said, Punisher itself is wide open, right? That there is no if you download it from GitHub, you'll get the admin credentials. So there's nothing to hide there. This is the set of scripts that Punisher will run, right? And like I said, it tries to be a good cross-section of the typical operations, data creation, data modification, imports, exports, deletes, doing computational heavy stuff like whiles with variables that don't even touch data. So it tries to find every single possible type of operation that may be in our solutions. And you can add to these if you want to. When you go look at the script, right? Don't fall in the trap, if you will, where you're going like, I could write the script much better. It's true. A lot of these scripts are written to be expensive, right? So that we can actually monitor what they're doing. If I write a very fast script, it's going to be difficult to capture what it's doing, right? So these scripts are not meant to be efficient. They're meant to tax FileMaker Server. So keep that in mind. So I have all these scripts in here. You can sort of see on different iterations and different servers how long each of these ran. But it's really comes down to this, right? In this version, I have about 70 different servers or server configurations that I tested. That's kind of odd, this artifact here. There we go. So when you set up a new test, you would create a record here in the server configs just to record what your server is all about, right? In this case, it's an AWS T3 large. It has one processor with 2 cores. This is the core speed. This is the amount of RAM. This is the instance type, the processor that's in it. And then you can pick what operating system is running on that server. That's really just documenting your server. Any load test that you've done will show up in here when you're done. So when you have your server or you pick one that already exists, you can configure a test. All right. Over here, you set how many concurrent PSOS sessions will be running during your test. 1, 5, 7, doesn't really matter. Right. This one is not used here, the iterations. That's a feature that I never finished. You can specify the build number of your server so that you have good information. Most of these are kind of irrelevant. We had some performance, and you remember those, HOnza. There were some features, performance features in FileMaker Server 18, 19 that came and went. So at the time, it was important to record whether the feature was on or off. Like now, the only ones that matter are whether you have persistent cache on and off. Not that these features are meant to impact performance, but you want to know whether they do, right? That's part of testing. Like if I have persistent cache on, does it make a difference? Should I be worried about that, right? So these are exactly the questions that we want to see answers for. And you can choose which scripts that you want to run, right? Select all, select none. By default, you pick all the scripts because that gives you a good cross-section, again, of all the different operations that you could do with FileMaker Server. But if you really wanted to test just the impact, say, of hard drives, right? Then doing something like the test log while, you can say, well, that's not relevant. That's not going to tax the hard drive. I want to do things that create records, do an import, export, right? So you can fine-tune what it is that you're testing by selecting the scripts that are going to be involved in the test run.
And those scripts that you select run one by one or simultaneously?
When you start a session, it's all like I can't really move this. It's a card window, but say that I have 20 concurrent sessions, right? So there will be 20 sessions that all start with this script, and they will all wait for each other to finish before they move to the second script. And then all 20 will be running that script at the same time, and then wait for each other.
So the start time of each script is synchronized between across those sessions, so that they are always doing the same thing at the same time.
Correct. And that's on purpose, right? Because I don't want one script to be taxing the hard drive while the other script is still doing the while loop, right? Like that would muddy the waters as to what the numbers mean for the time that you got them. So that, like I said, they're all synchronized to all run at the same time and then wait for the slowest. When the slowest is done, then they all move on collectively to the next script. So if I click this button here, then I will run one test with 20 concurrent sessions for all the scripts because I selected all the scripts, right? You can also choose this button here, and this one will, regardless of what you put in here, this one will run a set of tests with 1 concurrent user, then move on to 5 concurrent users, then move on to 10, then move on to 20. That's typically my preference because I want to see how it differs under load, right? You can imagine if you only have one perform script on server session, it's got free run of all the server resources, right? If you have 20, there's going to be some contention and some competition for resources. So it's kind of nice to run all of these. You can even schedule these if you want, right? I can say start within 1 minute. And this one, abort all sessions, is really meant to be a fail-safe. Like if I wrote some scripts and I messed up, I don't want my server to like melt, right? Like because like 4 days later, it's still trying to get through everything. I can say if you're running for more than 4 hours, abort everything, like stop everything, right?
And how do you do that? Are you using the FileMaker Server admin API to stop those scripts or something else?
No, the perform script on server sessions, they all try to read from the abort time. Like they know what time it is in their session, and between those synchronized runs, they will say, should I continue or have I run out of time?
So if you have a loop, for instance, in that loop you are constantly checking whether it still should be running.
Correct. Correct. So that is your fail-safe, so that you'll never have a runaway server that you then have to kill, right? Of course, you typically would run this on a server that isn't doing anything else, right? Like, don't run this on production because because your users will not be very happy. But beside that, you're messing up the data. You're messing up the test data, right? Because if the users are just doing their own thing, then the numbers that are generated aren't strictly from this test run, right? They'll be tainted or poisoned, if you will, by whatever the users are doing. So
Yeah, it's like running a speed test while also downloading a movie, right?
exactly, yeah, yeah, yeah. Don't do that while you're watching Netflix, right? It's that's not very relevant. So if you run this, then it'll do its thing for a little bit. I won't run this. Actually, no, I can do this on this one, and then I kill it. Actually, this is a T3 large. I can do it this way. Yep. I'll do it with 2 and abort after 30 minutes. They're off. Yep. Oh, yes. It's going to be somewhat slower because of the screen sharing. That always seems to affect this laptop here a little more than I would love to.
It does tend to mess with it. Someone had a question about the automatic logs that server generates. Is there an option to choose what you want those logs to tell you? Because some logs are not always useful.
We have different types of log, right? The event log is always on. The stats log is optional. Well, it's on by default now. Topical stack, client stats log. There's a few more obscure logs as well hidden in there.
Yeah, there is a slightly new feature. I think it was introduced in 20 that you can choose in the config whether the script events are appearing in the event log or if they are in a separate log. But there is a lot of information going to those logs. We in the past we used to have the option to get notified about errors and warnings, and we could choose whether we want only errors or errors and warnings. Then this option was removed. I think it's now back in 21. But for this reason, by the way, we created a few years ago a tool called Log Monitor, where you can specify regular expressions for which you want to watch in your logs and get notified by email or push notification. So if you want to just watch for specific messages that you want to pay attention to, then this is one option to use. And it's a free open source tool that we have on our website and on GitHub, just like this Punisher is on GitHub as well.
And I would second that. I wouldn't, like, even if you could at the source configure FileMaker Server not to log certain things, I would not do that, right? Like it's because you don't know until you need them that you need them. So I would really want to log everything, and then use a tool like what HOnza was just saying to filter what it is that you're looking for, but capture as much as you can. All right, so this will run until it's done with all the scripts. So it has 2 sessions though, as I configured. Again, there's a fail-safe in here. Like if I needed my FileMaker copy of FileMaker Pro to do something urgent, I can request a stop, and then at the next synchronization, when the sessions are done with their script, they will check. This basically just sets a flag in a one record table. So they'll check that to say, should I stop, right? So in addition to the abort time that we set, you can also manually abort and let the scripts run that way.
That's useful. By the way, as we were talking about the logs, one thing that's worth mentioning is that all the FileMaker server logs are actually tab delimited. So you can import them to FileMaker and then use FileMaker to analyze the data that you get.
Absolutely. I've lost my other FileMaker here. I had another one open.
I'm going to toss out a slightly off topic, but still semi-related question because someone asked it. Hey, since I have both of you here and you're both the performance people, how does FileMaker Server compare in terms of speed to MS, SQL, or other databases?
Well,
you're the guest, so you're the first to answer.
all right. It's whatever comparisons you can think of, they're not going to be fair, right? Because they compete in different areas. And I'm sort of like hedging my words here a bit, because FileMaker is slower, right? Like a dedicated backend like Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, whatever you can think of, these are dedicated backends that are tuned for performance. FileMaker is tuned for performance as well, and the Claris engineers are always looking for more performance, but we're playing in a different sandbox, right? FileMaker's forte has never been pure database backend speed or pure computational power, right? The forte of FileMaker has always been the total package that combines the database engine backend with the easy to create front ends and the scripting language that is easy to get into, right? So that's always been FileMaker's strong point, not the pure dedicated backend stuff. So that's why I said these are not fair comparisons. Like FileMaker is always going to come out slower in these kinds of benchmarks, but that's on purpose, right? That's not because FileMaker is bad.
Well, I would not 100% agree that it will always become slower. I think the key is just like when in the old days of Power Macintosh being released and people complaining that Macs were slower than PCs, then Apple came up with a way how to market that, and that they were saying, well, you should consider the speed of the combo of the user and the computer, not just the computer itself. And I think you can apply the same principle to databases. You should compare the performance of the solution developed on that platform and the combo of the user and the solution, and what the user with that solution is able to achieve in particular amount of time. So it's always about using the right tool for the right job. And FileMaker, as Wim Decorte says, is a tool meant to be used for specific kinds of tasks, and for those it excels. And it excels much better than Oracle or MS SQL, because in terms of what you can create with it, how quickly you can create it with it, and how efficiently you can work with a solution built on FileMaker, that can be very difficult to beat with a different platform.
I think you're spot on, HOnza. I think that's entirely right. Like you can give somebody a copy of FileMaker Pro and say, go build something, right? And they'll build something. Give them a copy of Oracle and they'll build nothing at all, right? Maybe they'll create some tables, but that's it, right? Like what else do you need? You need a different skill set, right? Like, you need to decide on a tech stack for the front end. And you'll need to create a tech stack or pick a tech stack for the scripting to put it all together, right? So it's a different thing.
I have a quick question about Punisher from the audience from Preben. Hey, I downloaded Punisher from GitHub. It's asking me for an account name and password? Question mark.
It's in the GitHub. It's ETS.
Oh, there you go. ETS.
It's in the README. It's about halfway down the page. I probably should surface that a little better. All right. So when you have your test runs done, and we're still in FileMaker, right? So we're using one of our other tools that Soliant has called Carafe, which is a bundle. It's an add-on actually that can deploy different JavaScript things. So what we're looking at here is a web viewer using the a pivot JavaScript library. So this is where you slice and dice the data, right? So this is where it really gets interesting because up to this point, you've configured your test runs on the different servers and whatnot. This is the point where you can now say, how do I look at the data from different angles so that it makes sense to me whether something that I'm looking for either to confirm or to be surprised at will make a difference, right? Like all of the different machines that I have running here have been listed. I can say I just want to create. As you can see, I did a lot of tests on different types of AWS boxes. Right. So if I do my T3 large, apply, I want to see. No, of course that's fine. The different versions of FileMaker Server that we ran some tests with. So if I just want to compare these two. Oh, that's not a really good. I just had the two test runs in there, the ones that we just did earlier. See if I can do something a little more meaningful. Yep. Right. So at this point, what are we looking at? Right. So we're looking at the same hardware. It's a T3 large. Actually, I can probably move that over here if I wanted to. Right. That's the beauty of pivot, right? That's what I mean, slice and dice, right? You can really look at it from different angles and say, what is it that we're looking at? So the same machine.
So you're basically configuring by drag and drop here what you want to see on one or the other dimension in that table, right?
Yep, correct.
Correct. So like a sorting or grouping criteria.
Yep, exactly. So and if you don't like something like because it's the same machine, it's a two-core machine, so the comparison here is irrelevant. If I don't like it, I drag it back in here, and it disappears from my analysis. Same with performance. Performance is kind of irrelevant. If I want to see the load with just 20, for instance, right? So that's how I can look at these things. So that's the beauty of pivoting this stuff, and this is all done inside FileMaker based on FileMaker data, right? So we're reading from FileMaker data when we do these things.
So based on your experience, how many tests do you need to have collected for this to be useful?
Typically what I do is, like I mentioned, I will do this 1, 5, 10, 20 like default setup and just let it run. It'll run for, depending on the server, clearly how fast it is, but it'll run for maybe an hour and a half there, something like that. Per server, I will do 2 sets of those, right? Just to weed out anything that the server may be doing at the time. Maybe it was checking for updates, things that you have no control over at the machine level or at the OS level. So I will do 2 sets of 1, 5, 10, 20 per server before I then move on to the next server and start comparing these things.
And right? Do you have a way to combine those results, or is that the iterations feature that you didn't finish that was supposed to be used for?
No, because you don't need to copy your main copy of Punisher to every server so that it can collect into Punisher. Like you can install Punisher on a number of machines. When do I have this one open? No. So when you're like test runs, right? I'll do this one. So when you're done with a test run, you'll have the results here, and you can export your found set of test results, which will go basically, it'll create a JSON file on your hard drive. Then you can go into your configs and say import config and runs, right? So if you have different servers, all you need to do is basically just save it out from whatever server you were testing, and bring it all back into one master copy of Punisher. That is going to be your central repository for all your test runs, if you will. So that's how I do that.
Well, I'm into something a little bit different. Earlier you mentioned that you had some like a number of iterations that you didn't finish that feature for running the tests. Yeah. Number of So I was wondering whether this is what was supposed to then be able to, let's say, combine those test results from the different iterations and either calculate average or minimum of them to consider instead of having it done manually by watching those charts and picking which one I should focus on.
No, this feature would be because I mentioned, based on your question, I mentioned I would do 2 runs of this 1, 5, 10, 20 per server. So if I had finished this and I made this 2, I would only have to click it once and it would go 1, 5, 10, 20, and then reset, do 1, 5, 10, 20 the next time, right? So it doesn't affect the visualization or the analysis of the data that you have.
So right now, if you run it twice, you will just see 2 sets of results, right?
Yes. So if I go into here, let's see if I can find them. The ones that I ran today. What is it? What is today?
24th of October. Yep.
Thank you much. All right. So earlier today, I ran a 1, 5, 10, 20, and then we ran that 2 sessions a little bit earlier, right? So this is where I would see my test results for just that run on that server, and that's where I would then export it. But the analysis, if I come in here and look at the stats, use compiled, that's the making sure that the numbers are ready for pivoting is always going to happen in the background. There's nothing I need to do except come in here, and of course you can see the spinning wheel. The more data that you've collected, the somewhat longer it takes for that initial pivot to load there. I can probably change this so that it starts with a blank instead of trying to show you some results already.
Well, I think actually, especially for beginners, it's better to start with something so that it's always difficult to start with a blank page, right?
Yep, exactly. To give you an example of some of the results, right? So this was run on a 2011 Mac Mini, so a really old Mac Mini, and this was run on an M1 Mac Mini. Of course, this was running Ubuntu to make it as efficient as possible. This was Mac OS. You can see the effect. Of course, this one has 8 cores, but you can see the effect that an old Mac Mini has versus a new Mac Mini, right? So this took 29 seconds to run 20 sessions of this one script. This took 3 times as long, right? So these are the kinds of numbers, the actual numbers that you will see for doing these kinds of things. There may be other operations where it really doesn't matter that much what the difference in processor age is, if you will. But those are some of the things that you can look at real easy.
And what does it mean when there is a chart completely missing, like when you scroll here? Yeah, for this one.
Yeah, this one, when I ran the M1 test, I probably omitted that script for that one, so it got no data for this one. There's some other ones that, like these ones are what these mean is that I really need to look at the script to make the script a little less efficient, because it happens so fast that half the time it doesn't even record, right? So I need to slow down the script or make it less efficient, so that when I do a search on an unstored calc, it doesn't even register. It's so fast that it just blows by.
Yeah, it reminds me that sometimes it's very difficult to run like a laboratory test for a particular operation, especially if that operation is normally pretty fast. Like performing find on an indexed field is a typical action that's very fast, even in FileMaker, and running tests on that such operation and getting meaningful results, not affected by the overhead of just running the test can be quite difficult.
I've selected two scripts. One is a slow searches and one is sorting data, right? And I picked these ones to highlight that people like simple things, right? Like people want to know, is FileMaker Server 21 faster than FileMaker 19? Or is it the old Mac Mini faster than the other one? The answer is always a lot more nuanced than just a plain yes and no, right? And this is a good case in point. For instance, sorting data on a new Mac Mini is that's what, like 4 times, not quite, 3 and a bit times as fast. But a slow search it's faster on the M1, but it's not magnitudes of order faster than on an old Mac Mini, right? Oops, didn't want to do that. So that is what I meant by the nuance. So it's really, it depends on the operation what is going to be faster or slower. And what it means for developers is they then need to evaluate in their solution based on their population of users, which of these operations matter the most for my solution, right? I'm just making stuff up, but if I don't have solutions that sort a lot of data, I'm not going to get a lot of extra benefit from between these two machines, right? It's a little bit of a skewed comparison because yes, you'd always pick the M1 Mac Mini versus over the 2011 Mac Mini, but it's meant to illustrate that the different types of operations on different types of hardware, specifically, a little less so on different versions of FileMaker Server, will have a different impact, right? Case in point, the question has come up when FileMaker Server started supporting the ARM processor, right? The expectation was, oh, everything is going to be much faster. It really isn't, right? Like if you compare an Intel, like exactly the same specs on the machine, but with an ARM processor and an Intel processor, you'll see that some of the operations on an ARM are faster. Most of them are, but not everything is faster, right? And not everything may be as faster, or the differential between faster and slightly less faster isn't always as big as you think it is. I think I
But
have
it seems to work great as a learning tool, like to learn what parameters are affecting which kinds of operations. Because sometimes it's obvious, like that reading or writing to hard drive is probably an operation that's mostly affected by the hard drive speed, but some of the operations are not as obvious, and it's good to try it and figure out in terms of FileMaker what actually is having that biggest impact. And interestingly, what I learned in my testing is it's not staying the same. So what you learn about FileMaker 21 now may no longer be true in 22 or 23. So it's worth retesting and relearning whether something has changed or not.
I could not agree more. It's easy to get into a mental rut because you learned something 5 years ago and you hold on to it, right? Because it does take a dedicated effort to go out and find the answers, right? And that's why tools like this can help, right? Because once you understand the concept of the tool and what it does, and you look at some of the scripts and you add some of the scripts that you want to test for, then it's consistent, right? It's the same test on different hardware and or different versions of FileMaker Server, and you can recheck your assumptions. Exactly like you said, HOnza, it's so important to do, right? Because if you're working on, say, FileMaker 2024, but you base all of your knowledge on FileMaker 18, you may be making wrong architectural decisions.
Okay, I see there are some questions in Discord regarding performance, but not necessarily related to Punisher.
That's fine. We can tackle them.
How many transactions could you achieve in a FileMaker server compared with SQL? Kind of like related to the earlier conversation, they asked a follow-up question. Like they know that FM generally tends to be slower, barring HOnza's argument towards why it would not be. But like, how many transactions can you actually toss
Yeah,
back and forth?
I would say it depends on the kind of transaction. Do you have a better answer, Wim?
I was going to say the same thing. Define a transaction, right? Even in SQL Server, you can do complex things across multiple tables with multiple records and call that a transaction, same as in FileMaker.
Well, sometimes people tend to talk about the CRUD, create, what is it?
Read, update, and delete.
Read, update, and delete, yeah. And but even those are not clear definitions, because specifically in FileMaker, creating a record can be fast and slow depending on how the table is structured and how many dependencies you have there. So this is typical difference between FileMaker and other databases. If you have just a plain table with one field and no dependencies, it's going to create and update the records quite fast. But as soon as you start adding like author enters and calculations, and when you, for instance, when you have other windows open, FileMaker also, because one of the nice features of FileMaker is that it updates the data you see automatically when someone else is updated. That's unique in the world of databases, but that's extra overhead that has to be triggered every time you create or update records.
Absolutely, right. That's what I mentioned, and what we talked about a little while ago. You have to look at the whole package, and one of the core features of the FileMaker platform is that instant propagation of data and schema too. If you don't need that, then don't use FileMaker, right? Like then maybe you use SQL Server if you want raw speed, you may not be in the right platform there. One of the ways to look at that question is how many transactions do you need, right? Because if you're just trying to optimize for sake of optimization, that's not a good path to be on, right? But if you look at the use cases that you or your client want, and you go like, yeah, we need to build a website that needs to be able to withstand 1 million visitors per second, I wouldn't build it in FileMaker, right? Those are some like the obvious the answer. So I would say I would need to understand what a transaction is in this context, and two, I would need to understand what kind of performance levels we're looking for under peak, right? So, and then obviously it would help make a decision between tech stacks and platforms, but it would also, even if you decide to build this in FileMaker, you need to have the answers to this, because like in anything, you can build something 5 different ways, right? And if I know the parameters to which I need to be scored against, I will build it in a certain way that I don't necessarily going to build if I don't have to, right? Premature optimization and all of that good stuff.
What I like to say when talking about optimization, don't try to develop everything optimized from the beginning, because then you have your development time 10 times or 100 times higher, and no one will pay for it. Only optimize what needs to be optimized.
I was just going to say the same thing. And this is going to be a lot of what I talk about in Engage in my session, and it's based on real life examples, right? We had a client come to us not too long ago, very busy server, like 200, 300 concurrent users on it. So that's not at the high end of what you expect to see, and the solution was struggling, right? But they were not looking at the logs, so they weren't looking at the numbers. So they were sitting there brainstorming, what could we do? Maybe we need to use faster cores, right? Which is not a bad thing to do. Like if you have the money, spend it, right? Or give it to me. But the by using the logs, I was able to show them that the top 3 things that they were gonna do were the wrong things to do. Like it would cost money and time, and it wouldn't move the needle, right? By using the top call stats and really looking at them, it was clear that if they focused on 2 things, that would be a big impact, right? For instance, these are the 4 potential bottlenecks of any server, not just FileMaker server, any server, any task that you give to any server, right? Processing power, that's CPU speed and number of cores. The disk I/O, how fast is the disk subsystem, memory, and networking. If your problem is in the disk I/O, trying to solve it by going with a server with more cores or faster cores isn't going to do much, right? It's going to move the needle a little bit, but it's you're wasting your time and your money. So figuring out what that is, and a tool like Punisher can help, right? Again, because it has a cross section of all the different operation types, and now you can use that knowledge to say, okay, I'll take that back. I'll look at my solution. What is happening in my solution? Am I largely reading data for reporting? Am I largely creating thousands of records? Am I processing the data that already exists? Those are all different kinds of operations that are going to stress different areas of FileMaker Server.
Kind of a semi-related question, but has Punisher revealed like anything generalized? I know that we're talking about specific servers, but like it'd be interesting to see what in general across almost any FileMaker server is the slowest type of script or the slowest type of T AWS server and what should be avoided or techniques that should be preferred, etc.
Oh, there's a lot to unpack in that one.
Sorry, I save you the hardest question for the last couple minutes.
We're out of time. Bye. I can start with the AWS T instances are the general purpose instance types, right? So the thing to watch out for is I'm not sure what the current default is, but because it's general purpose, it's not really meant to excel at any one task. So it's not too heavy compute optimized, meaning processors. It's not very memory optimized, that kind of thing. So it's a general purpose machine. But they can come with credits, meaning that they give you a number of CPU, an amount of CPU usage, and if you run out of it, they'll scale you down, they'll throttle you. They can do the same with disks, right? There's a toggle when you set up one of those servers to say unlimited. You're going to pay more, but you'll not be dinged with these credits. It's a classic trap, right? Like where you start doing something and it's fast, and then all of a sudden it's not fast. If you're not aware of this happening at the infrastructure level and you start fiddling with your solution in order to make it faster, you're doing the wrong thing, right? So that is one of the things to watch out for when you pick infrastructure in the cloud specifically. You typically don't have this with bare metal machines because you get what you get, right? Having said that, it's rare these days to come across bare metal machines in somewhat bigger shops. They if it's not in the cloud, they'll have their own VMware or virtualization platform. So the same rules may apply where IT may be looking, throttling, moving things, right? So don't just look at your solution when you're trying to troubleshoot. Figure out what's going on around you.
Yeah, you mentioned an important thing about like the cloud virtual machines, and that's the credits and bursting. I figured this out when I was first stress testing FileMaker Cloud, which was based on the same kind of instance. And as I ran the intensive test there, part of which was a script that was almost like running a endless loop for some time, and I a little ran out of those credits in about an hour. And what's important difference between this and bare metal hardware is that on the bare metal hardware, when you stop utilizing it, you get the full power immediately. But with those cloud instances, when you run out of credits, then you may have to wait several hours before you get the original performance back. So in case of the FileMaker Cloud, which I was testing, this period was about 12 hours. So after 1 hour of running loop in a script, the performance of the server dropped down to about 1%. It was 100 times slower, and it remained 100 times slower for the next 12 hours.
Yep. It's definitely something to be aware of. There was, in part of that question, there was what's the slowest thing in FileMaker? Like what's the most inefficient thing? You can pretty much make any kind of operation behave really badly. I don't think that there's anything, barring anything that is specific to the solution, because HOnza already mentioned this, like creating a record in and by itself isn't really slow, but if you have a big table with many indexes and a lot of stored calcs, auto enter calcs, that kind of thing. That all is all going to add up to how long it takes to create a record. Probably the single most inefficient thing you can do in FileMaker is create a gigantic spider chart, a graph. Like there's probably nothing worse for general performance than doing that, right?
I strongly agree. And if you look up my past articles for the word arachnophobia, that's
I like that.
specifically what I was talking about there. I ran some tests and we even went through exercise which was very time consuming, like 2 months of work. But after we figured this out, we took our biggest solution and which had that big spider chart, and we literally redone all that into smaller table occurrence groups and turned it to a almost proper anchor buoy design, achieving huge speed gains. But one thing maybe also worth mentioning is because FileMaker lets you update schema on the fly in the production. So one thing to always avoid is changing a table definition in a way that causes FileMaker to create or recreate an index,
I couldn't agree more.
Especially in a big table.
Coming back to your point about the graph there, this chart is what I always use with developers that I mentor or with in-house developers or client developers. This column here is the number of table occurrences inside your spider, the number of table occurrences that are linked together. The number of permutations is the work that you make FileMaker do, right? Because FileMaker, every relationship between any 2 points in your graph is a valid relationship for FileMaker, right? Both directions. Because mentally, many of us think in one direction, but for FileMaker, it's both directions, right? So you can see if you only have if you only have 10 table occurrences linked, which isn't gigantic, that's 90 valid permutations of relationships for FileMaker to evaluate, right? So if we double that, if we go to 20, the number goes up to 380, right? From 90. So the work went up 4 times, right? We've seen some of these, right? This was from a recent one. I just highlighted it. If you have 72, which isn't even a wild number, right? Now you're making FileMaker evaluate 5,000 of these relationships, right? Mentally, as a developer, you're probably thinking 72 relationships, right? No, this is 5,000, right? So if you go down and say like 200, which is like a number where you go like, I get a little scared when I see that in right here. So how about this number? 39,000 relationships you're making FileMaker evaluate.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that you didn't intend that.
Yeah, I think even one even more scary thing to mention and to actually pay attention to is when you have this large table occurrence group, focus on how much extra overhead you add by adding a single table occurrence.
Yep. Look at the difference between these two numbers, right? Just adding one table occurrence adds whatever I know the math is adding 400 relationships for FileMaker to evaluate.
Yeah, and by the way, the reason why this matters is there are operations inside FileMaker when FileMaker literally goes through all these permutations in a loop.
And that's why I'm scared of spiders.
I'm going to toss one last question at you, and then I'll let you flee, let you and HOnza flee and get
Yeah,
escape.
what I like to say, being an arachnophobic is making you a good FileMaker developer.
Someone wanted to ask if you could use Punisher to test permutations of FileMaker Cloud.
You could absolutely nothing against it. It's just a FileMaker file. It's actually 3 or 4 FileMaker files. Put it on any FileMaker server, FileMaker Cloud or otherwise, and just let it rip.
Enjoy the.
I would maybe just suggest that before you do that, change the default password to something your own.
Probably be a good idea. Okay. Thank you both for, thank you, HOnza, for hosting. Thank you, Wim, for coming. This was really fascinating.
Yeah. And
It's always
thanks
good
for
fun.
showing more about the Punisher. I guess I hope we have convinced some people to explore it and start using it, and maybe sharing interesting findings that they discover.
Yep, yep.
I saw some people posting screenshots in my Discord while this was happening, so I think
Nice.
that has indeed occurred. So, with that all being said, I will let you go. HOnza, I will see you next week. Wim, I might see you soon, according to Richard. So,
We're working on that. We're working on that.
thank you everyone for coming, and I will
Okay.
catch you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you as well. Thanks, Wim.